Hello and welcome. My name is Zaffar Iqbal and you are watching the Mojo Story. India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri is set to visit Bangladesh on December 9 amid attacks on minorities and Hindus in that country. Now, remember, Sheikh Hasina's government was ousted in August, and since then there have been a series of attacks on the targeted minorities, their places of worship, and their establishments. Sheikh Hasina has, since her ouster, been in India, and she has made her first public address wherein she has blamed the Yunus led government of what she calls a genocide in Bangladesh and directly being responsible for the targeting of members of minority community in that country. And there are also reports coming in that Bangladesh government has in fact planned to remove the image of the father of nation of that country, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, from its currency notes. What all is happening there? To discuss this, we're joined by an eminent panel today. We are joined by uh, we joined by Prabhu Dayal. He's the former diplomat. Welcome to the show, Prabhu Dayal ji. We're also joined by Meenakshi Ganguly, who's Deputy Asia Director, Human Rights Watch. Welcome to Mojo Story, Meenakshi. And we're also joined by Dr. Mubashar Hasan, postdoctoral fellow at University of Oslo, Norway. He has authored a book on narratives of Bangladesh culture, politics, and history. Welcome to Mojo Story, Dr. Mubashar Hasan. If I may start with you, Meenakshi, you've seen the series of developments that are taking place in Bangladesh. What is your take on the situation there? There have been reports coming from that country that minorities have been repeatedly targeted. Now there are also reports that religious leaders, including Chinmay Krishna Das, was arrested. Their places of worship have been attacked. How are you? What's your assessment of the situation?
It's extremely concerning, Zaffar. Thank you for having me on the show. It's extremely concerning what is happening. But I also am worried about some of the things that seem to be a misrepresentation as well. So we should be clear about what exactly is happening, hold the government to account for those crimes and ask them to solve them, but also be very careful about disinformation campaigns because they will then create more disturbances, more outrage, more anger. So I can expand on this later, but just to say, Zafar, that I listened to Sheikh Hasina's speech, and I found that that the fact that she was so unpopular, that her repression is what drove people to the streets, is something that she does not acknowledge. She does not acknowledge the hundreds of enforced disappearances, the extrajudicial killings that occurred under her watch, the fact that there was a complete clampdown on freedom of speech and expression, the abuse of laws. These are things she does not acknowledge. Now, if she doesn't acknowledge that, what happens is that what we are only able to say is that the current government is perhaps replicating things that had happened in her government under her watch. So we do need to be very careful about how we proceed as responsible international actors on the situation in Bangladesh to ensure that there is stability.
Well, that's an important point. The way that Sheikh Hasina led the government and ruled the country seems to be the same way now the new government is doing. They have banned her speech, calling it as a hate speech. Of course, when they target her and her government of putting curbs on freedom of speech, then they are doing the same in a different way. They are also trying to make changes that are not democratic in nature. If I may now go to Prabhu Dayalji. Prabhu Dayalji, what is your take on the situation? India has now finally decided to send its foreign secretary to Bangladesh for an assessment of the situation. India has been saying that Bangladesh has been, there have been attacks on minorities. India has been condemning those attacks. And now the foreign secretary will be traveling to that country. Do you think that the message that India has been sending will now be sent in clear terms when he reached there, and he'll also have the opportunity to speak to a cross section of people, and then the situation might to an extent change?
Well, Mr. Zaffar, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. Let me mention that Bangladesh is not just a neighbor, it is a friend. And we have had very good and very close relations with
Yeah,
our eastern neighbor. Now, we are concerned with some of the happenings in that country.
right.
Let me mention that when it seized power in August this year,
Yeah,
the interim government of Muhammad Yunus had reaffirmed in the strongest terms that every Bangladeshi has the right to establish, maintain, or perform respective religious rituals and practices
right.
without hindrance. However, what we are witnessing is completely different. The international media has reported, not just the Indian media, that attacks on religious minorities, that is, the Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Ahmadiyas, have been taking place on a regular basis. And India has taken up this matter in one way or the other with the Bangladesh authorities. Unfortunately, no real action seems to have been taking place. There have been multiple attacks on the minority Hindu community in particular, and these attacks have been by extremist elements. Uh, After the overthrow of Sheikh Hasina in August this year, I think there have been over 2,000 documented violent incidents
Yeah,
targeting the minority Hindu community. So, this has raised a lot of concerns and anxiety in India, and it is damaging the relationship. Of course, there is the internal situation of Bangladesh, their internal struggle, who's to come into power, what has to happen to Sheikh Hasina, all that is separate. But there is a nationwide concern in India about the religious minorities in Bangladesh. And not just India. For instance, Donald Trump has said that these barbaric violent acts against Hindus, Christians, and other minorities who are getting attacked and looted by mobs in Bangladesh would not have taken place had he been the president of the United States. So there is global concern. The British Parliament has debated on this matter. So it is important that the Bangladesh authorities uh, put an end to this cycle of violence which is taking place. It is spoiling their name. It is tarnishing the image of Bangladesh. And from the Indian point of view, I think it's important to try and ease bilateral tensions while at the same time sending across the right message to Bangladesh that we want the protection of the religious minorities to be ensured.
Right. Before I go to Dr. Mubashar Hassan, do you think, Prabhu Dayalji, the India's response so far has been the correct response? It has been a balanced response, or do you think India needed to do more? On one hand, Sheikh Hasina is in India, Bangladesh wants her to be back in that country. On the other hand, India is saying that Hindus and other minorities must be protected in Bangladesh. Do you think how has India dealt with the changing dynamics in that country?
Well, first of all, there must be a message which has to be sent by all political parties. All political parties must unite on one platform and send a strong message to Bangladesh that we all want the protection of religious minorities. Secondly, as regards Sheikh Hasina, India is not going to send her back. She has been a friend of India, and let's face it, if
Yeah.
she is sent back to Bangladesh, she will be executed. There is no doubt whatsoever in my mind that she will be killed, whether by mobs or whether through the judicial process. She's been a friend of India, and I don't think that India will ever allow her to be put in that situation. We would not be extraditing her.
Right. Dr. Mubashar Hassan, it generally boils down to what Yunus government is doing in Bangladesh. There seems to be a difference in the word and deed of the interim government there. They say that they are there to protect the minorities, but we are seeing these attacks taking place. And when this is being asked to the government, they come up with the answer that these are exaggerated claims and exaggerated media reports. What do you say?
So, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I think, I'm not a government spokesperson, so I cannot speak on behalf of the Yunus government, but I can tell what I have been observing. First of all, let me underpin that the challenges of against minority rights violation has been there. It's part of Bangladeshi society. See, even during Sheikh Hasina period, there were annually there are repeated attacks on minorities. We did write an article in the Foreign Policy magazine on how Facebook was used to instigate violence against minorities. And yes, there are incidences that have increased after the fall of the government, but there are also a mix of political violence and violence against religious minorities. So that needs to be disentangled, number one. Number two is that Professor Yunus, it seemed to me at least, has been working to try to promote religious harmony. He did sit with religious leaders of all kinds yesterday and talked about that we do not distinguish between minorities and majorities. And there are wider awareness in Bangladeshi society that there are violations against minorities that took place. Whether you kept talking about that there is increased violations against minorities, but we don't know the number. That what happened yesterday or the day before yesterday, I'm not aware of any attacks that took place against the violence against the minorities. The challenges are there, but I think it's at the same time, in my view, government is working to mitigate that.
Right. Meenakshi, we had a government spokesperson of Bangladesh on our show a few days ago, and we asked him, what is the timeline? How are you going to resolve the matters? Now, he said that they want make some reforms. The interim government will make reforms, which is not a democratically elected government. And then perhaps all the parties can come and take part in the elections, including Sheikh Hasina's party. Do you think that's a viable option for democracy in that country?
Well, I think what has happened is, and again, this is where we have to acknowledge some of the problems and the legacy of Sheikh Hasina's administration. This was 15 years where a number of institutions were politicized, including security forces, the judiciary, and therefore the reforms are needed. There cannot be, and what would be brilliant is if India were to back the Yunus government. Is an interim government. Yunus has no political ambition. He's saying that he will step away as soon as he set up all these systems, created an election commission that will conduct a free and fair election. He wants to leave. So what would be really helpful is if India were to support the interim government to make these reforms, to bring these reforms.
Yeah.
Because what has happened is the police, for instance, we know that scores of policemen were killed after Sheikh Hasina's government fell. And that is because of the anger of police abuse. And this was something that was allowed because of the lack of accountability that existed under the Sheikh Hasina government, where politically motivated incidents occurred. Now, the same incidents are repeating themselves. The judiciary is a problem. We are finding that under Sheikh Hasina, hundreds of people would be clubbed into one incident, and then they would be constantly picked up and shoved into some FIR or the other. Same thing is happening now. Now, these are reforms that have to happen. This will take time. And yes, the Yunus government needs support to make this happen. But I do want to flag another thing, Zaffar, before I move on, which is that India also has to consider some of the reasons why they need to act. And I'm very glad that the Foreign Secretary is going, so that there is better and stronger messaging, which is not to do with the government, but to do with Bangladeshi people. And with Bangladeshi people, there are several reasons for the position of India. One was that there were consecutive elections that the Awami League stole. The opposition would boycott, or they would be forbidden from participating, including the one in January 2024. And often Bangladeshis feel that India should have spoken out. India as a democracy itself should have spoken out when these bad elections occurred. Another is attacks on religious minorities, Muslims in India. And there is therefore anger about that in Bangladesh, and we need to address this, because we cannot have a cycle of violence where Muslims and Hindus are being killed because some country or the other is taking revenge. So we have to be very, very careful about how we address this. And the third is this talk of termite that had happened in the past, the illegal immigration. Now, the irregular migration from Bangladesh is a legitimate issue, but our political leaders all across the world need to be a little bit careful about how they handle this conversation. This talk about immigration, whether it is Trump or anywhere else, including in India, should be a little bit kinder than it was when we start describing people as termite. So we need to be little, I think India as the bigger country, and as Mr. Dayal said, as the bigger neighbor and friend of Bangladesh, needs to come across and be more supportive to what is going to be Bangladesh's future. And that future can include Sheikh Hasina, but it should be also encouraging Sheikh Hasina to acknowledge some of the authoritarian measures that she had adopted. And yes, I think that elections should be one where Sheikh Hasina should participate. And I agree with Mr. Dayal that Sheikh Hasina is not at all going to be safe right now in Bangladesh. And so an extradition process has to be a very, very, one with absolute due process to ensure her security.
Prabhu Dayal ji, Meenakshi raised many points. One of them, of course, being that India's complete and total support of Sheikh Hasina, irrespective of the fact that she was ruling that country, which many say was a very authoritative rule. Do you think that has helped India putting all the eggs in one basket? And now there are also these reports of the condition of minorities in India, the way that infiltrators or people, they were called as infiltrators, those people who come from Bangladesh, the terminology that was used, all of that has sort of added together and put India in a situation where it does not have much to maneuver now, because it has really taken all of its cards and put them in one place.
Zaffar, let me mention that in international relations, there are neither friends nor enemies. There are only interests. There are national interests. We have some vital national interests as regards Bangladesh. We do not want Bangladeshi territory to be used in a manner that would threaten us. We do not want the maritime territory of Bangladesh again to be used to threaten us. These are principal concerns. We want transit facilities through Bangladesh. We want Bangladesh to be integrated in our overall regional approach. We have the approach of cementing closer relations with our eastern neighbors. And that is why BIMSTEC was set up. BIMSTEC's intention is that we should be able to integrate South Asia with Southeast Asia and also provide access to the maritime shores of our northeastern states. So we have certain interests where Bangladesh is concerned, which are very positive. And these were also beneficial to Bangladesh. For instance, there was a lot of investment flowing from India to Bangladesh. There were industries which were set up. And there were all sorts of processes relating to the modernization of that country which were taking place. Now, we had an interest in Bangladesh as it was beneficial for our own interests. But, and this is a fundamental but, what has happened now is that our interests in that region are being damaged. Not only are the religious minorities, particularly the Hindu minorities, being targeted, which is creating a lot of tension here within the country. There's a lot of unhappiness. Now, the previous panelist, the lady speaker, correctly mentioned that there are concerns in Bangladesh about religious tensions within India. Yes, we have to sort this matter out. But this does not mean that tensions between the minority community and the majority community in Bangladesh should be allowed to escalate. The Bangladeshi authorities have the responsibility to curb those tensions, and they cannot say, that just because there are religious tensions in India, therefore we can't do a thing about religious tensions within Bangladesh. All these tensions must be eased. And that is possible when all communities live in peace and harmony, whether it is within India or whether it is within Bangladesh. Let me mention that South Asia is one of the poorest regions of the world. It's a shame that so many people live below the poverty line in our region. And there can only be prosperity of the region when the countries work together. Countries prosper when the regions where they exist prosper. This is what we have been trying to achieve, regional prosperity. SARC failed, BIMSTEC was set up. It was working well. Bangladesh is a key player in BIMSTEC. So, our entire objective of bringing about prosperity in our region gets defeated if there are these sort of tensions within Bangladesh and if the Bangladesh government is unable to work in harmony with us. So I feel that the objective of our government should be to engage in a dialogue with the Bangladeshi authorities, and that they are going to do with the visit of the foreign secretary. There has been a continuous effort to engage in a dialogue, but the attempt should be to drive home to Bangladesh the point that a relationship which is cordial is beneficial to both sides. What we need is bilateral cooperation. What we need is the improvement of the economic situation in both countries. What we need is employment for the people. We don't need religious disharmony.
Right. Dr. Mubashar Hasan, what is your sense of the situation? Is the government there making a genuine effort for reconciliation? I'll come to the specific thing, that is erasing the legacy of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the father of Bangladesh. There are reports that his photos, his images are now being removed from the currency notes. We have seen his statues being toppled. How is this reconciliation happening? Because he is the father of that country, and he is Sheikh Hasina may not be in power, but she is the leader of an important political party in Bangladesh.
So, reconciliation takes place after justice takes place. It cannot be taking place where people have a feeling of injustice. That's number one. Number two is, the reason Sheikh Mujibur's photos were being removed. To understand that reason, we need to look back what happened in last 15 years. So I'll give you two and three examples. If a 14-year-old boy wrote something critical about Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in Facebook, he would be arrested. He was arrested and sent to jail. If someone wrote something about Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, he was a political leader. He is not a saint. So there are political leaders are always subject of criticism. If anyone criticized Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, he or she would have been arrested and would have been sent to jail. So that needs to be understood that the anger towards Sheikh Mujib is a doing of Sheikh Hasina's regime. That's number one point. Number 2 point is that yes, Sheikh Hasina is still the leader of of a political party, but two things we need to add into this context. To the Bangladeshi people, she is also a mass murderer. To the Bangladeshi people, she also killed students and forcefully used to put people in, forcefully disappear people, which is a crime against humanity. So there are criminal cases against her. So I don't know how, in a civil country, a person who is accused of criminal activities would be normalized. And
But
finally, Bangladesh is a very young nation. And obviously, as a big neighbor, India needs to understand its pulse. And I totally agree with the ambassador and Meenakshi that there needs to be mutual understanding and pragmatic relationship both for both of these countries to move forward.
right, as you yourself said that she's only accused, she has not been convicted yet. So perhaps, you know, handing her a sentence will not be fair. At least there has to be a trial that can take place. And
Yeah.
also, two wrongs never make a right. If she did something wrong, that cannot be perhaps replicated with a similar wrong in an opposite direction. That has to
Can
be
I just,
perhaps kept in mind when you talk about reconciliation. Yes, quickly before I go to Meenakshi.
it's just we also need to understand her action resulted in people losing their lives. So that's not an easy way to reconcile. Thank you.
Right. So, Meenakshi, of course, the view that's coming from Bangladesh is that the way that she ruled was completely authoritarian, and people were not really happy with the conduct of that government. But she made a public address recently. That was the first public address, a telephonic address that she made recently, in which she called Muhammad Yunus as the mastermind behind mass killings in Bangladesh. She said that there is a genocide taking place in Bangladesh. How do you view her recent statement, the first after she was ousted from power and after she came to India?
So Sheikh Hasina has always had a bit of a personal, uh, anger towards Dr. Yunus. She attempted to prosecute him in the past. She made him resign from Grameen Bank. Now this is a Nobel Peace Laureate, and it would have been nice for any Bangladeshi to feel proud of him. And it is good that he has come in. He has repeatedly said he has not got political ambition. He does want to do what is right for Bangladesh. In that case, but he is struggling. I don't think any one of us are questioning the fact that there is a problem right now, that there isn't enough control, which is why the role should be of the international community to bolster his efforts. We cannot dispute the fact that institutions in Bangladesh are broken. We cannot dispute the fact that the judiciary, the justice system, the election commission, the National Human Rights Commission, all these institutions need to be rebuilt because they were all politicized. And therefore, what has to happen is support to Yunus government. Now, I'll say this about India, for instance. India has always maintained, and Mr. Dayal will probably agree with me, India has always said we work with the government of the day. We've even dealt with Musharraf. India deals with the government of the day. That's what the Indian government will say. So if Yunus is right now in government, the best possible way to solve this is to support Dr. Yunus in the reforms that he wants to undertake. We are actually even encouraging the Human Rights Council to try and build an OHCHR support, a UN support till the elections are held. Bring a mandate so that you're putting that will also create a credible space for some of these allegations. We all know that the internet, although it has many uses, has also a very, very disruptive factors. So, an Indian sitting somewhere looking at these images is going to be distraught because they feel like their Hindu brothers are being traumatized. But we don't know the facts. We haven't, as human rights activists, we try and understand what were the incidents that happened, how many casualties are there. And we are not being able to find this level of claim that is being made, and certainly not, genocide is a very, very big word. We are not even using it in an Israel-Palestine context. So we need to be a little bit careful about these flashing of these words that get thrown around. And the last thing is that, Bangladeshi politics has to be a little bit more democratic. It cannot be personalized. When Sheikh Hasina was in office, she would not let Khalida Zia, the opposition leader, leave her house. She arrested her. She would not let her get medical treatment. She would not let her go to sort of the funeral of her son when he died. So, and now the same thing is happening here. It's playing out at the street level between the student wings of both parties. It's playing out in the level of now Awami League leaders being tossed into jail, similar to what had happened earlier with BNP leaders or Jamaat leaders. Now, this is not the way. I mean, if we want to be a democracy, we have to understand, and this is something that India should be telling even Sheikh Hasina, who is after all at hand, that there cannot be this sort of personal attacks. A democracy functions with this political disagreement, and then one side wins or the other side wins, and then there's another election and another party wins. First of all, there's grabbing of a fourth term in January was not something that the Bangladeshis could put up with. Young Bangladeshis kept saying, we've never had a chance to vote in a proper election. This is something that she has to acknowledge, and she has to understand how much she was despised. The fact that there are people who have now been released from these secret detention centers where people were disappeared and kept, and without any sign of daylight. I mean, this is something she has to acknowledge, because we now know that some of these were something that she ordered or her cabinet ordered. These are serious crimes. And the first thing that should happen is an expression of remorse. And as Mubashar said, if there's going to be reconciliation, there has to be acknowledgement of wrongdoing. We are not seeing that. What is she saying? She's saying Abu Sayyed was shot. There are images of Abu Sayyed, an unarmed boy, being shot at by the police. And she says, oh, well, they were rubber bullets. He wasn't actually shot. Why were her police even shooting rubber bullets at an unarmed boy? But they were. So then you cannot defend these actions. You should not be defending these actions. There should be, first of all, instructions to her to try and be a little bit more sort of accepting of her wrongdoings and her government's wrongdoings. And then there should be a reconciliation attempt which works towards a democratic situation where political parties agree to disagree and run for elections and vote, and do not play out their differences on the stage, on the streets, or locking each other up in this crazy way. This is not mature. And as Mubashar said, Bangladesh is a young democracy. But really, each time that there has been a claiming of democracy, there has been blood on the streets. Sheikh Hasina herself has done it. In 1990, when she and Khaleda Zia as BNP and Awami League overthrew the Irshad martial law, they were also on the streets. In 2009, again, the military had taken over. Again, she was on the streets. Her people were on the streets. Why does democracy have to constantly be snatched back? Why does it not function as a democracy where people are voted in, people are voted out in a rights-respecting manner?
Meenakshi, before I go to Prabhu, Dayal and Mubashar, I want to quickly have a word from you. What is your assessment of the human rights situation on the ground? Because as you put it rightly, there are so many videos that are circulating, not just from Bangladesh, from India also, from other places also. We cannot really check their authenticity.
Yes.
And we cannot report them. But here we're getting lots of videos that are circulating. What is your assessment of the human rights situation in Bangladesh as of now?
I think it is unsettled. The law and order situation is still extremely unsettled. One of the things that Sheikh Hasina said was correct, that because there was so much anger against the police, a lot of police stations were not functioning. So in the initial days, soon after she left the country, there were attacks and there was no police. So what was happening is that but one of the good things that happened at that time is students and actually Islamic leaders and clerics stood in front of places of worship also to try and protect the minorities, which is something we should celebrate. But are there attacks happening? I think that the more, and this is where we need to be very, very careful, because public rage based on disinformation is a very dangerous thing, because it can lead to actually things happening which are not happening by creating a momentum. And therefore we have to be very careful. These videos, some are true, many are not. The BBC did a whole report on how some of these reports, some of these claims were that doesn't matter to a young Hindu person who's looking at it on Facebook in India.
Right.
They're going to believe it to be true, and they're going to be upset. And that is what I'm saying, that the disinformation campaign has to end. It has to end not just from Bangladesh, but from India, from anywhere else where it is being spread. These things have to be debunked very quickly, and the truth has to come out. There is also the truth. Truth is that minorities in Bangladesh are feeling extremely vulnerable, and that is an issue that has to be addressed as well. But we have to manage this a bit better, and I do hope that India and other countries will do that to support the Yunus government to create a more rights-respecting environment, instead of the sort of politics of vengeance that seems to be playing out right now.
Prabhu Dayalji, is India doing that? Is India sending across signals that it is supporting Yunus government. At least as far as the reforms are concerned, India is solidly behind that government and will also try and involve itself when it comes to that reform process, or India is just watching from the fringe what is happening there.
It takes two sides to be able to work together. And no matter how much India wants to reinvigorate the friendly relationship with Bangladesh, unfortunately, the signals which are coming from across our eastern border are not at all friendly. Let me mention that India is perceived, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, as a friend of Sheikh Hasina. And because Sheikh Hasina is a persona non grata, therefore, for that reason, the relationship with India has nosedived.
Yeah.
So it does not seem to me that the Bangladesh government is at all keen at the moment to work towards a good relationship with India. In fact, the signals which are coming are quite the opposite. Now, there was a reference to the sort of doctored videos and doctored evidence relating to the violent acts against religious minorities, particularly the Hindu minority. Some of these could be doctored, but let me tell you that the government of India does not form its opinions on the basis of such videos. The government of India has a high commission in Bangladesh. The High Commission sends information to the government of India, and that forms the basis of opinions here at headquarters. There are also media reports by international correspondents. And these are not all doctors. They are people who are physically present there and who are reporting the on ground situation. So, regardless of whether the common man in India forms his opinions on the basis of doctored videos on Facebook, etc., the government of India doesn't indulge in that. The government of India forms its opinions on the basis of solid evidence, which is provided by the most important source it has in Bangladesh, and that is the Indian High Commission. Now, it is not correct to say that there has been nothing that incites public opinion here. For instance, the case of the very famous Hindu priest, Chinmoy Krishna Das, who was
Yes.
arrested while he was taking a flight and was locked up. And when he was to appear in court, no lawyers were able to appear on his behalf. You know why? Because his lawyers were all beaten up. About 70 lawyers who would have argued on his behalf have been implicated in false cases, and some of them have been severely beaten up. Now, are the photos of those lawyers lying in a beaten up condition, terribly traumatized, are they fake? No, they are not, because they are all on the international media. So the first step really has to be taken by the Bangladesh government because it is in charge. India is not going to be able to intervene. You know, India does not even want to intervene in the internal affairs of Bangladesh. India wants that the internal situation should be rectified by the Muhammad Yunus government, that there should be a transition to a democracy, that the election should take place. You would remember that when Muhammad Yunus set up his interim government, there was a promise to have early elections. There is no sign of those elections being held. There should be early elections. In fact, the political parties, and not just Sheikh Hasina's party, but the others are also very concerned about this fact. There
Right.
should be a transition to democracy. There should be the protection and preservation of human rights. There should be, in particular, the protection of the rights of minorities, because there is no doubt that what happens across the border will inflame tensions in India. We don't want that happening. We want peace in the subcontinent. We want friendly relations with Bangladesh. We want the Bangladesh people to be happy and to be able to work with us in a spirit of collaboration. That would be in the interest of not just India, not just Bangladesh, but of the entire subcontinent.
Right. Prabhu Dayalji, in fact, I asked this question to the spokesperson of Bangladeshi government about the lawyers being beaten up. And he, in fact, accepted that there was a lawyer who was beaten up, was in the ICU. He, however, said that he did not represent Chinmay Krishna Das, but that really does not matter. The fact is that not a single lawyer turned up in his defense after one of the persons was beaten up. Dr. Mubashar Hasan, if I may ask you, what is the way forward? You know, we're looking at a transition towards democracy, as everybody is saying, but the government has no timeline for that. It says that it will first go for reforms. The number of reforms, we don't know what all institutions will be reformed. Judiciary, of course, they say that they will reform the judiciary, the executive. Nobody knows how long that process will take on, and finally, when will a process of elections begin there? Do you have any sense of the situation? How is it going to pan out from here?
In fact, Dr. Muhammad Yunus said that he formed 6 reform commissions, and they are supposed to deliver their report by the end of December. And from January, they will hold consultation with the stakeholders, that would include political parties and civil society members, to chalk out a plan that what are the reforms that they could do while there is no elected government and no parliament, and what reforms future government may undertake. So even though they haven't provided a clear timeline, they did speak about, I think, around 3 months for reform reports, 3 more months for consultations, and they will move forward to election. As Meenakshi said repeatedly, and I do agree with her, that Dr. Muhammad Yunus do not have any political ambition. I mean, he's a Nobel Peace Laureate, and it will not do any justice to him at the end of his career and even to life to have that legacy of a leader who do not hold elections. I think he will eventually chart Bangladesh towards a democratic transition. Secondly, if I may, I'm not a foreign policy professional, but I do study foreign policy, and I think it would be prudent for India at the same point to move forward and redefine its interest in Bangladesh and redefines its partners in Bangladesh. It seemed to me in the past 15 years, it was more of Sheikh Hasina's pocket India was in, rather than in India's pocket Sheikh Hasina was in. So, so that is my final point.
Last word to you, Meenakshi. We saw that Sheikh Hasina's speech has been banned in Bangladesh. It's a curbs have been put on freedom of expression. On one hand, we're seeing this happening. On the other hand, we're seeing talks about reforms taking place. What is your sense of the situation? What's going to happen here on? There seems to be no clarity. Intent may be there, but how is it going to be executed?
It's extremely concerning. I mean, for years, Tariq Rahman's speeches used to be banned in Bangladesh. And to see now that Sheikh Hasina's speeches are being, they've not said her speeches are going to be banned, they've said hate speech is going to be banned. But then who's to determine hate speech? There are guidelines on this.
Only one speech that she made after her ouster. So
After her
clearly
ouster. But I'm sure she'll make more. But the point is that they are saying it is not to do with hate speech. Now, hate speech is something that all that incites violence, is something that we condemn, regardless of whichever political leader around the world that makes it. However, makes these speeches, because we are in a very unruly space right now. People are easily angered, and therefore we do want to prevent incitement to violence. But that said, I think it is extremely disappointing that, again, what Sheikh Hasina had done during her term to forbid political voices from speaking out, to lock up opposition leaders, that should not be replicated now. that will not lead to a democratic future, a rights-respecting democratic future in Bangladesh.
Yes, and reconciliation is the key word here, and all the parties need to accept and understand that if at all that country has to move forward, otherwise it will be caught in that vicious circle that it can never come out from. Thanks so much to all our panelists for joining us today, and thanks to our viewers for watching the Mojo Story.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.